It
So,
is just shortly after 12 now. Did you have a quick question, Jenny, before we begin?
oh, I was just going to say I was impressed. It's the 37th. Is that one per year? So does that really mean 37 years?
37 years in a row. Yeah, long
Wow.
tradition.
Wow, that's amazing.
It sure is. Yeah, the planning committee puts together a good session. So I'd like to welcome everybody who is joining us and say good afternoon. Welcome to the 37th, as we are saying, annual Kemptville Winter Woodlot Conference. My name is Olivia Foster, and I'm the communications coordinator at the Ontario Woodlot Association. I am pleased to be moderating the final session today, and once again would like to extend a thank you to all of the sponsors of this year's conference, as well as to the organizing committee members, Dorothy Hamilton, Martin Straight, and Jim Hendry. I'll just let everyone know who's joining us for the first time that the Kemptville Winter Woodlot Conference is a longtime legacy of the Eastern Ontario Model Forest, which is a nonprofit charitable organization that works to develop ways to sustain and manage forest resources across Ontario. And that is working alongside landowners, First Nations, NGOs, government, and industry. Alongside the model forest, the Ontario Woodlot Association is a community of woodlot stewards who work together to restore, manage, and advocate for healthy forest systems. So on behalf of the planning committee, I'll just step in and say that it's been a great session to have all of these speakers join us for the last couple of weeks, as well as several participants across the province and across Canada as well. And we're looking forward to our last session today. So thank you again to the entire planning committee for putting together what continues to be a great series. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, I will inform everyone that the presentation is being recorded and everyone's cameras and microphones are muted except for the panelists. At the end of today's presentation, there will be some time for questions, we hope, and you're encouraged to submit any questions that you have through the Q&A box during the presentation, which should just be at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Jenny McCune. Jenny grew up on a small farm in Dufferin County with a little 10-acre bush in the back. She completed her Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph, Masters of Science in Ethnobotany at the University of Kent in Canterbury, England, and a PhD in Botany at the University of British Columbia. She is now a professor at the University of Lethbridge, where she and her students study plant communities and plant conservation in Southern Ontario and Southern Alberta. I had the pleasure of spending a day with Jenny and some of her students last year while they were taking a break from hunting rare plants, and they kindly offered to offer some helping hands with some greenhouse work. So it's great to see you again, Jenny, and thank you for taking some time out of your day to share your experiences with all of us.
Thanks, Olivia. Happy to be here. Am I allowed to share my screen?
Absolutely, yeah. So I will stop sharing mine and I'll make sure that multiple participants can share and you should be all set.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I can see the screen coming up there.
How's
We can
that
see
look?
your, good, we can see your PowerPoint and I think it's all ready to go.
And how's the pointer?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Olivia, for that introduction, and thank you to the Ontario Woodlot Association for inviting me. It's an organization that I really admire, and I'm very glad that it exists. I'm speaking to you today from Lethbridge on the tip of the Great Plains here. The University of Lethbridge is on the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which we like to acknowledge. But I'm actually from, as Olivia said, Southern Ontario, from a little 100-acre farm in Dufferin County. And here is looking across our hay field here to the little bush in the back of the farm, which is pretty typical for Southern Ontario. And here's what it looks like in the late summer, early fall, when all the leaves have come down. And no matter where you're kind of standing in the bush, you can see the edges because it's only a little 10-acre piece. But we really value it as part of the farm. And this is a typical situation across Southern Ontario. A lot of the landscape looks like this. So because we have such good agricultural soil, a lot of the forest was removed to make way for agriculture. And we have these little sort of islands of forest left in a sea of either agriculture or sometimes city land, subdivisions, housing, factories, that kind of thing. And so this is a map from Larson's book on the woodland heritage of Southern Ontario. This is 20 years, more than 20 years old now, but it tells the same story looking at the percentage of forest cover in each municipality. And you can see, especially down in the far southwest of Ontario, some municipalities have, less than 10% of their area is covered in forest. And I don't think this has increased much in the past 20 years. Some other municipalities, like up on towards Tobermory, or over towards where maybe some of you are, in the Kingston area, have a bit more forest cover. The other thing about forests in Southern Ontario is that they're almost entirely privately owned. There's a few small parks, conservation authority land, and things like that. But the vast majority is owned by and stewarded by private landowners. And so in terms of conserving rare plants and all of the plants that rely on these woodland ecosystems, it's really important to work with landowners, and that landowners are taking on this stewardship. The other thing about this region of Canada is that it's a real hotspot for rare plants. This also is a pretty old map from the mid-90s, but you can see here, this sort of dark purple region, we have many, many rare plant species in Southern Ontario. And depending on how you define rare, the number could be anywhere between 100 and 200. And this is kind of a consequence of two things. One thing is that it's become so highly fragmented due to the importance of agriculture in this region, but also it's the very tip of this eastern deciduous forest zone. So this is the only place in Canada that has these type of forests. And so it means that you have this combination of a very unique group of species for Canada, combined with a huge reduction in forest after European settlement. So we have a lot of rare plants that we're interested in, or that conservation biologists like me are interested in tracking and helping. So in Canada, we call that eastern deciduous forest zone the Carolinian zone. And you can see here a close-up map of Southern Ontario, showing kind of the extent of this zone. And I was kind of interested in how many participants we have who may be in this zone. So I've asked Olivia to do a little poll for me, if you could launch that now, Olivia. Just wondering how many of you have a woodlot in this zone, and maybe how many of you don't. So yeah, here's the poll. Is your woodlot in the Carolinian zone? This is anonymous. We're not tracking, we're not tracking your location, just for my interest to see how many we might have. So yeah, if you're willing to say if you're in this kind of interesting little tip of the Carolinian zone that extends into Southern Ontario. How's it looking, Olivia? Got
Good.
some answers?
Yeah, lots of answers. I'll end the poll for you and share results.
Awesome. Okay, so we have about 23%. So we do have some woodlots in this zone and most not. So that's good to know. Thank you. Yeah, I've worked across Southern Ontario, but a lot of our work recently is focused in this zone, just because of this kind of abundance of different rare plant species that grow here. I'd like to give you a kind of a pop quiz, if the participants don't mind. And I'd like to show you a suite of 12 woodland spring wildflowers, and just see if you recognize them. So you don't have to necessarily know their names, but maybe just keep track on your fingers and toes, or keep a little tally on a piece of paper if you want. And then at the end, I'll ask in a poll how many of the 12 you recognize. So here's the first one. Hopefully, if I can get my screen to shift. There we go. So this one is a pretty early bloomer, but not too early. Beautiful white flowers in these kind of heads. This is foam flower, so give yourself a tick if you recognize that. Here's what a group of them might look like from the side, and here's what it looks like when it's done flowering and it's fruiting. So you may have seen this in your forest. Here's another one, but it's not poison ivy, even though it has these 3 leaflets. It has these beautiful white flowers with 4 petals. One common name is two-leaved toothwort. So give yourself a tick if you recognize that one. This one is very early spring bloomer. I guess kind of like late April even to late May, somewhere in there, depending on where you are. Spring beauty, so give yourself a tick if you recognize that. Here's one we have a lot of in our little bush growing up. It's got these bright blue berries that look like blueberries, but don't eat them because they are poisonous. This is blue cohosh. Here we have one that lots of people like to collect for the kind of bulbs that are like onions. Some people use them in stir fries. I call these wild leeks. Some people call them ramps. The leaves come up super early in the spring. The flowers don't happen until later in the summer. But give yourself a tick if you recognize that one. Here's one that also has kind of blueberries, but they hang down low, kind of under the stalk. It has these pairs of little whitish green flowers under the leaves. And this is called hairy Solomon seal. Another beautiful white spring wildflower. If you break the stem, it has this kind of orangey red juice. Later in the summer, you can see these little seed pods coming up, even though the leaves are mostly withered away by then. And this is called bloodroot. So give yourself a tick if you recognize that one. Here's an interesting one. Kind of looks like bleeding hearts that you might have in your garden. But it's actually, the common name is based on these little yellowy orange tubers that kind of look like corn kernels. So one common name for this plant is squirrel corn. This one has these big, flat, wide leaves underneath. You get a little white flower that kind of hangs upside down. And eventually you get a fruit like this. One common name for this plant is mayapple. I had a landowner tell me that these make really good jam, but I've never tried it. So give yourself a point if you recognize that one. I hope everyone recognizes this one, our Ontario provincial wildflower, white trillium. Here's another one. It's amazing how many of these are white. Pretty small leaves. There you can see my thumb there with white flowers and eventually these little red berries. Some people call this wild lily of the valley. Some people call it Canada Mayflower. Give yourself a point if you recognize that one. Here's another very early one. This one is yellow for a change. Apparently the little bulbs taste like cucumber. I haven't tried them. And it's got these sort of speckly brown green leaves. One common name is a trout lily, this one. So those are the 12. I'd like to launch the poll and see how many of those you all recognized. And I realized we didn't include 0. So if I'm pretty sure everyone recognized at least the trillium. So if you by chance you didn't recognize any of them, you can choose 1. So 1 can mean 1 or less. But yeah, how many of those dozen did you recognize? Or maybe you have them all in your woodlot. I'd love to know that. And of course, these are just a very small sample of all the plant species you can see in your woodlots. Across all the surveys that we've done in Southern Ontario, I think our tally is up to about 800 different species that we've seen in people's woodlots. So a very, very diverse flora we have in Southern Ontario. But these are 12 pretty common ones that we tend to see in the spring, especially.
We're at 89% participation, Jenny.
Okay, any last votes? Take a couple minutes, but yeah, when you're ready, let's see the results. Okay, so most people, what was the highest one? 11 people recognized 11, 10 people recognized 9. So yeah, pretty good split here of how many people recognized. Thanks, Olivia, that's great. I read a paper by some forest biologists that were trying to kind of give an index using these particular species. And based on their surveys across the deciduous forest zone in Eastern North America, they said if you have 6 or more of these in your woodlot, you have excellent diversity. If you have 2 to 5, that's pretty good. And if you have less than 2, probably sometime in the past you had really heavy logging, maybe lots of grazing, or perhaps your forest is young and it is just recovering from being a plowed field. Our little bush that I grew up with, I think we have about 4 of these. We have blue cohosh for sure, wild leeks, trout lilies, trilliums. I think we might have mayapple. But yeah, they say that, you know, if there's been heavy grazing in the past, spring beauty and trout lily are pretty resistant to that, and blue cohosh to a certain extent, but you might have less of these other ones. So thank you for your participation there. Now I have a theory that exotics are much better recognized by landowners than some of the rare plants. So I'd like to show you 6 exotics and do the same game that we just played, if you don't mind. So I'm going to show you 6 exotic plants that we see in Ontario woodlots, and I'm not going to tell you the names to the end, but just give yourself a point or keep track if you recognize them. So the first one, I hope everyone will know immediately. Here's the second one. This one is kind of notorious in shady forest systems. And we see a lot of this when we do forest surveys in Southern Ontario. Pretty famous plant. Okay, here's the third one. This is a tree or shrub. It can get quite large. Produces these dark blue berries. And here in the bottom left, this is what it looks like when it's a little baby seedling. So you can see beside my finger what they look like when they just come up. This can really take over in certain areas. Now this one is actually an orchid. Did you know we have exotic orchids in Southern Ontario? This is I have to admit, a favorite of mine. I've even seen this in people's flower beds, but we see, you know, the odd sprig of this plant in almost every forest that we survey. It's very common now, but never very abundant, just a few plants. Has these kind of greenish, not very showy little flowers. This one, also a shrub, I think maybe becoming a bit more abundant, especially in Southern Ontario. Kind of likes wet areas, so maybe in riparian forests along streams and things like that. And here is a notorious one. Lots of people are worried about this one for sure. So if you recognize that one, give yourself a point. So here they are with their names. We had dandelion, garlic mustard, common buckthorn, Japanese knotweed. The orchid is called helleborine orchid. Epipactis helleborine is the scientific name, and the notorious giant hogweed. So Olivia, if you could launch the poll, I'd love to know how many of those 6 did people recognize? I predict it will be a high number, but I don't know. Some of you may be dealing with buckthorn or garlic mustard or wondering how to reduce them in your own woodlots. They're definitely tricky to deal with.
We're over 90% now.
Awesome. Can't wait to see the results. Let's see them. Okay, so most of you recognized 5 or 6. Well, 49% recognized 5 or 6. I guess most people recognized at least 4. So that kind of lines up with my hypothesis, is that these are, overall, the weeds are pretty well known. And that makes sense because they're pretty abundant, but also I feel like whoever is doing the PR for giant hogweed, I wish they would do some outreach about the rare plants, because almost all the landowners, many landowners that I've done surveys on their land, I come along and they say, oh, you're a botanist. I'm really worried that I might have giant hogweed. Can you please check if these plants are giant hogweed? And most of the time, in fact, actually all of the time, I've never seen giant hogweed. Most of the time, it's this beautiful, huge native plant called Great Angelica. So here you can see 2 super tall specimens. One of the main differences is that the stem is really smooth and the flower heads are spherical. They're not flat topped. However, you might notice in the background here, there are a couple plants with flat topped flower heads, but those are also not giant hogweed. Those are another native plant called cow parsnip, which doesn't give you a horrible rash the way a giant hogweed can. So I have yet to see giant hogweed on Ontario. I know it is there, but whoever is doing the outreach about it is really getting the word out. And I would like to get the word out about some of our rare native woodland plants so that people would know more about them. So what I'd like to do now is show you 6 rare woodland plants. I'm also going to show you some maps of where they are and where we think they could be. And so, yeah, again, just if you know the plant, or if you've heard of it, maybe give yourself a point. So I'm going to start out with the green dragon. This is one of my favorite Southern Ontario plants. It's a close relative of the jack-in-the-pulpit. It's in the same genus. So if you look at these the fruits here, it looks really similar. These will turn bright red, just like the jack-in-the-pulpit seeds do. But instead of 3 leaflets, it has this crazy whirl of anywhere between like 5 and 12 little leaflets. So as you can see here, now in these maps, the green dots are known locations. And then the red is areas that are computer models. And I'll tell you a bit more about those in a bit. But these are areas that our computer models predict would be suitable for this plant. So you can see the green dragon is mostly limited to the Carolinian zone. So those of you in the Carolinian zone may have seen this. Those of you over here around Ottawa probably have not seen it. So this is not super rare. You know, there's probably around 80 around there known occurrences of this in the province. But that's much less common than many of our species. Now here's one that does occur over towards Ottawa more. This is called the Ram's Head Lady Slipper. You can see here, based on the size of my finger, how tiny an orchid this is. Really interesting plant. And here's the map for it. So you can see Lanark County over here is kind of a hot spot. It really likes these kind of open sort of barrens where there's like very shallow soil and a very sparse tree cover. But we also have records of it in the shallow soil areas like the owl bars here on the Bruce Peninsula. And also there's historical records on these kind of sand dune forests, like south of Grand Bend here. So we've looked for this, you know, in some of these areas down to the south and not found it, but we have seen it in Lanark County. A very cool little orchid. Probably somewhere between 20 and 80 populations in Ontario, but this plant is super rare globally. Basically, we are the hotspot of this plant, and it doesn't grow very many other places. Here's a very cool fern. This is called the hart's tongue fern. It's not feathery and lacy like many of the ferns that we see in the forest understory. And it is concentrated all along the Niagara Escarpment here, leading up to the Bruce Peninsula. It really likes that limestone bedrock. And I remember one of the first places we went looking for this plant, I showed a photo to the farmer and he said, that's not rare. And it's true, it wasn't rare on his property. He had a whole bunch of it. But just like the Ram's Head lady slipper, Southern Ontario is kind of the main place where this plant grows in the entire world. There are a couple over in Michigan occurrences, and then there are a couple of limestone caves in Tennessee that have a few records of this species, but mostly it only grows here. And it's a very interesting looking fern. So give yourself a point if you've seen that one or heard of it. Here's a little sort of late spring, early summer plant called American Bromwell. It's got these wide leaves, these little yellow flowers with 5 petals. And it's in the stone seed family, they sometimes call it. So it's got these little egg-shaped white hard fruits / seeds. Look like little white eggs. It also is mainly in the Carolinian zone, although our models suggest it could live out towards Peterborough and maybe even up around Bancroft in a few areas. There is an exotic plant that looks a lot like American Bromwell. This is called European Bromwell. And the main differences are the weedy one has much thinner leaves and it has white flowers instead of yellow. Here's one of our focal study species. This is the wood poppy, which is this beautiful, it blooms in about mid-June, these beautiful yellow, bright yellow petals. It's in the poppy family, so the Papabraceae, and it has these sort of hairy capsules, fruit, looks like little hairy footballs. Now, before we started our work, there were only 4 known locations of this plant, and they were all around London. And so our models suggested that only this area around London would have this plant. But we actually found a new population up towards Goderich, somewhere up here. So in this case, our model was not great. So it did get us into sort of similar habitats around the London area to look, but it turned out there's actually a population quite a bit farther north. But this is endangered in Canada because we only know of these 5 populations in the whole country. It's a bit more abundant as you go south towards Kentucky is kind of the center of its range. There's also an exotic that's a lookalike for this one, celandine or greater celandine, it's sometimes called. The difference is that the petals don't overlap in the exotic, and they have these smooth, upright, sort of skinny pods as opposed to this fuzzy football hanging pod that wood poppy has. And finally, this is the spring blue-eyed Mary. This blooms really, really early in the spring in forests along riversides. So it's kind of loves those wet riparian forests. And if you have ever seen this, I will be surprised and I will want to know immediately because we only have 3 known locations and these are all historical. So just to the north of London here, right along the Thames River, somebody reported this plant growing in 1954, and that is the last time that anyone has seen it. And so this plant is thought to be extinct. I think it might be still out there somewhere and just we haven't had the right person in the right place to notice it blooming away. So if you have a woodlot someplace, you know, London or south of it, especially along the river, keep your eye out for this plant in the early spring. You know, probably late April or very early May. So there you go. Those are just 6 of my favorites out of hundreds of rare woodland plants. And I'd love to know how many of these you've recognized or heard of. So we'll launch our last poll question. And to me, it makes sense that these are less well known because, of course, they're harder to bump into, right? They're not as common as trilliums or wild leeks or blue cohosh or those things that we see in, you know, almost every woodlot that you walk into. You could see some of those. These are much harder to find. And some of these are listed under endangered species legislation, either provincially or federally, usually both. But some of these are just rare in the sense that we know that there are few populations, usually less than 100, but they haven't been assessed or listed under any legal mechanism yet. How are we doing with the poll?
Yeah, it looks like we're about leveling off now. Perhaps
Okay.
I'll end it and share the result.
Yeah, let's see. I'm so curious. Okay. So yeah, with the exotics, most people could recognize 4 out of 6, 4 or more. And here people are knowing about 1. Wow, 5 people knew 5 out of the 6. That's really impressive. So we've got some keen botanists here, I can tell already. So yeah, thank you very much. So part of my work, and this started during my postdoc, is thinking about, okay, are there populations of these rare plants out there that we don't know about? In my opinion, probably almost certainly yes. However, we don't have armies of botanists to go around looking for these things. And so the question is, where should we look? And one way to prioritize places we should look is to use something called a species distribution model. We call them SDMs for short sometimes. Basically, the way they work is you compile locations where you know the species is growing already. And then you also compile underlying geospatial data on soil, climate, elevation, things like that. Surficial geology is often a good predictor of where a plant might grow. If you think about the hart's tongue fern that really loves to grow on those limestone escarpment locations. So we can use computer models to predict, based on knowing where the plant is and based on those underlying conditions, where are there other similar places that might have these conditions. So this is just an example. This is obviously just a portion of the range of green dragon in Southern Ontario. So each of these green dots is a known location where someone saw a green dragon. And so this is all along the Maitland River flowing into Goderich here. And when we build our species distribution model, now you can see each of these tiny little squares is a 1 hectare area. Orange means this is pretty good for green dragon according to the model, and red means this is awesome according to the model. So really good habitat. So you can clearly see that knowing we have these occurrences of green dragon all along the Maitland River, maybe we should look down here along the Bayfield River, because our model is saying this habitat down here is also really good for this plant. So what we did is we built species distribution models for about 40 rare woodland plants. And then we went out there and went to some of these little tiny squares with really good habitat to search for the plant. And we really wanted to focus on private land because those are the places that, in my opinion, are probably the least well surveyed by botanists. Unlike, sort of provincial parks that might have researchers out there more often. And so I devised these fact sheets so that when we're literally knocking on someone's door and saying, hey, can we go back out into your woodlot there and look for this rare plant, we had something to show them about what we were looking for. So this is the one that we made for the Ram's Head Lady Slipper, including the map to kind of show people where it grows. This is old, so I was at the University of Guelph at this time, so please don't use this email. But it allowed us to have something to show people when we were asking their permission to do a survey on their land. Here's the one that we made for the Green Dragon. And I had some colleagues, who I just got back from doing my PhD in Vancouver. And some people said, oh, landowners, they're going to be suspicious of you. They probably don't want you on their land looking for rare plants. But almost universally, everyone was very receptive, and we would, send them all the information that we collected on their land. So I think out of, 100, 150 landowners, we maybe had 2 that said, no, get lost. We don't want you here. Everyone else was very interested in learning more about the plants in their woodlot. So basically, the point of these surveys is you go to this place that the computer says, okay, this is good habitat. And of course, you want to know, is the rare plant present? But also, what other plants are present on the site? Because even if the particular rare plant isn't present, we can ask, is the model at least getting us into the right habitat type, the right community type? And that can help us assess how good the models are. So this work took place over 4 summers, and you can see where we went. So we really got around in Southern Ontario, and we focused mainly on private land, but we also did some surveys on Nature Conservancy property, Conservation Authority property, some municipal property like Lanark County Forests, and other sort of public/protected areas like that. And of course, this took an army of people. So these are all graduate students and undergraduate students from either the University of Guelph, where I started this project, or Carleton University, where I finished it. And we basically had a lot of fun delineating a 1-hectare area in these woodlots and sort of walking back and forth very systematically, writing down every plant that we could find, hoping to find some rare ones. And also kind of giving an estimate in our data of the percent cover of each plant, so how abundant it was. And the diversity in these forests really varied. So in a 1-hectare area, I think that's like 2.2 acres or so, we could find anywhere between 45 and 230 different plant species in that area. So we never knew what we were going to find. Sometimes we found really uninspiring things, little ravines that, landowners past or present had decided was a good place to throw stuff that they didn't need anymore. We also found unexpected plants. Does anyone recognize this? Definitely not native. This is someone's little outdoor grow up here that we unexpectedly bumped into. I expect the landowner didn't know about this because they did allow us to do a survey. But in many cases, we found the rare plants we were looking for. So we discovered 113 previously unrecorded locations of 47 rare plant species. Some of these were the ones that we actually modeled and that we were actually looking for. Here's me with my first ever green dragon. It's very exciting. Here's Hannah in the habitat of false rue anemone on the Kettle Creek, just south of London there, and Allie with our first Virginia bluebells. But also we found many, many rare plants that we had not modeled that we just bumped into, because if you look for them, you will find them. So this was really exciting. This was across 282 1-hectare forest surveys, including, we found a new population of wood poppy, as I mentioned, up towards Bayfield. This is a federally endangered plant, and we thought we only had 4 populations in all of Canada, so that one was the 5th, and that was really exciting. Actually, my field assistant noticed it. I was taking photos of that site. Also had the American Bromwell, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is rare, this is really exciting. And while I was taking pictures of it, my field assistant was saying, Jenny, isn't this wood poppy? And I was turning around ready to say, oh, it's probably just celandine, the exotic lookalike, but no, it was wood poppy. And also, interestingly, based on some statistical analyses, we found higher plant diversity on average in private woodlots than we did in public or protected areas. But there were lots of places that the models said were good habitat for a specific rare species that did not have that rare species. And so the question that brings to my mind is either, is the model not very good and this actually isn't good habitat? Or is this related to the fact that our forests are so fragmented now? It's really hard for some of these plants to get their seeds from one place to another place, even if it has good habitat. And secondly, many of the populations we found were really small, just one or a couple of plants. And so we don't know if those populations are viable. We don't know if they can survive over time, especially if they are isolated in a little fragmented woodlot. And so this has really led to the work that I'm doing now that I have my own lab and I have grad students that can work on this. So my PhD student, Emma, is working on rare plant translocations. So can we use these models to help us find good habitat where we could establish new populations of these plant species? So, it's great that we have 5 populations of wood poppy, but wouldn't it be better if we had 8 or maybe even 10, right? So if some disaster happens to one of the populations, we haven't lost 20% of all of our plants. So she is taking some plants. In this case, this is a rare plant called the crooked stem aster, and she's planting them in different sites with different levels of predicted habitat suitability to see if the model is a good indication of where the plant will survive best. And then my other PhD student, Amy, is actually tracking population sizes over time. You would think this is a very simple thing to do, just count the number of plants and then go back and count them every year and see how the population is doing. But we actually have very little of this data for rare plants in Ontario, and that's just because it's, it's time-consuming work. This is Amy deep in a population of wood poppy, counting and measuring each individual plant. And she can use this data to build population viability models that will allow us to predict, okay, is this population growing over time? Is it shrinking over time? And what characteristics of the site lead to healthier or more viable populations? And you can read more about our work at our website here. So I'd just like to end with some thoughts about what you can do. You are the experts on woodland management, but I often get asked, what can we do about rare plants? The first thing is really basic, just keep your woodlot as a woodlot, which is what you're already doing, right? So even if you only have a tiny little woodlot like this one here, because of the situation we have where we have so much fragmentation, even very small woodlots are really important and they can be habitat for rare plants. The second thing is don't let livestock in your woodlot. Here's my dad before he retired from the cattle industry. He did not let our cattle into the woodlot, but his grandpa did. His grandpa had, the odd sheep and the odd pig, and they were just allowed to wander around in the bush. And that's not good for the plants because many of these rare plants are tender and juicy, and a sheep or a pig would love to just eat it. Get to know your woods. So get out there and see what plants you have. There's great tools now that you don't need to, look through 500-page floras. You can just snap a picture, post it on iNaturalist, and it will tell you what species you have. I also really like OntarioWildflowers.com, which has some great photos maintained by a real expert amateur botanist that has got these great photos of almost, hundreds and hundreds of Ontario's wildflowers. Harvest isn't always bad. In fact, in many cases, opening up the canopy a bit can help native plants, including rare plants, but you want to be selective and not take too many trees, leave some big trees, and if you know that you have populations of rare plants, try and avoid them. And harvest carefully. This is a shot from a place we surveyed. I think that was down in Niagara. And the landowner let me know, oh yeah, we just logged that, 10 years ago or something. They had taken out a huge amount of massive old oaks, and it just turned into this jungle of raspberries and Manitoba maple and buckthorn. It was a real nightmare to survey. And I just wish they'd not taken quite as many trees. So that's my only advice to you. Most of all, I just want to thank you for being stewards of our forests and the plants that live in them. And thank you for listening to my talk. A lot of people have been involved in this work, including students, collaborators, all these various funders. I especially want to thank the landowners, like I said, over 100 landowners who invited us to come on their land and do surveys of the plants. And so this work could not be accomplished without them. So thanks, happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was very informative and interactive and fun as well. I might just share my screen here again. We have a little something for you. Thank you. So we like to give a little token of appreciation to each of the speakers. If you're able to see my screen here, we have a little book for you. It's called Around the World in 80 Trees. And once we get that to you, I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, that sounds great. Thanks, Olivia.
Excellent. So we will get into a few questions here. I will share my screen again and we'll take a look. There's been questions coming in throughout the presentation, but one popped out to me. In particular, if a landowner finds a rare plant, where is the best place or places to report it?
Yeah, so the best place is the Natural Heritage Information Center, the NHIC. They have a form that you can download and you just put like your name and where you're located and what you found. They are the ones in charge of keeping track of all our rare species, not just plants. And so they keep records of everything, plants, insects, mammals, birds, everything. So that's on the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Via them, you can find the NHIC and you can get one of their reporting forms. Yeah. You can also find their late lists of plants. So like I said, there's many rare plants that aren't necessarily listed under the Endangered Species Act of Ontario or the Federal Species at Risk Act. But nonetheless, we want to know where they are. So there's many more that we care about that we know are kind of rare, even if they aren't officially endangered.
An interesting question here. What qualifies as rare? Does rare necessarily mean it's in decline?
Yeah, so this is something that we puzzle over a lot because we don't necessarily have great data on how many populations. So for example, we know we have 5 populations of wood poppy now. How many did we have in the year 1500? How many did we have in the year 1750? How many did we have in the year 1800 before most of our forests were cleared? We actually don't know because we didn't have armies of people going around making collections or taking photos of plants. So undoubtedly, some of our plants may have always been rare, but it's very hard to know that for sure. So some of them we have better records of, and we can tell, like, yes, we used to have 60 populations, and now we only have 10 populations. So there's some of the plants we work with. I can think of one called the broad beech fern that, to my mind, is probably in decline. Historically, there were over 60 records, and now there's maybe 20 that we know are still there. So we're pretty sure that one's in trouble. But other ones we don't know, and there could be populations that we don't know about, right? So the NatureServe, which is a sort of North American association of province and state natural heritage departments, their criteria is, you know, if it's 80 populations or less that we know about, we consider that rare. So that would be, you'd be given a designation of S3, which means vulnerable. So sort of like 80 populations. If it's between 20 and 80, that would be S2, which is sort of threatened. And then if it's less than 10, we consider that very rare. And then, so that's kind of NatureServe's criteria. And then there's different criteria for, okay, should this be listed under legislation to protect endangered species? So yeah, it's a bit tricky, and sometimes we think something's rare, then we start looking for it more and we find more populations and we think, oh, actually, this isn't as rare as we thought it was. For example, the green dragon is considered in that sort of S3 category, like 80-ish known occurrences, but we found 19 new ones during our surveys. However, 18 of those 19, it was only like 1 to 20 plants, very small populations. And so it's very hard to know if those populations are self-sustaining or they'll last into the future. It's a great question, though.
We've got so many good questions coming in here. I've got one related to climate change. They've asked, how does climate change affect your modeling? And can rare plant populations adapt and keep up?
Yeah, so one thing that we're really interested in is, you know, as it gets warmer, biologists expect that areas to the north of where a species is now will become more suitable. And so it could be that these Carolinian plants, for example, that are sort of at the tip of their northern range, those populations will be really key if that species is going to be able to shift and track that sort of perfect climate as it shifts to the north. So that's one reason why these northern range edge populations might actually be really important to the species. Because some people say, you know, why should we care about these 5 populations of wood poppy in Ontario if we have, you know, hundreds of populations in Kentucky, right? And I always say, well, because there are wood poppies in Ontario that we, you know, they belong to us and they're part of our ecosystem, we want them to survive. But also they may be the key to the species as a whole being able to shift to the north. Of course, the challenge there is that everything is so fragmented, and the wood poppy has no dispersal mechanism other than ants. So it has those little seeds that have a lysome, it's called, a little oil-rich body that ants really like. But if you think about how far an ant can go with the seed, it's not very far. So there are debates in the scientific community of should we be helping these plant species to move further to the north to track their ultimate climate as it warms up. And of course, in Ontario, we also have the issue of, even if it warms up, eventually you're going to bump into the Canadian Shield, which is the wrong sort of geology type for many of these plants. So they may face a barrier there to kind of tracking the optimal climate. But yeah, it's a really interesting situation that a lot of ecologists are working on understanding.
There's such a variety of questions coming in here. Someone's asked, are you interested in hearing from landowners that want to have their land surveyed?
Yeah, so we, like I said, the first 3 summers, we literally just drove around. You know, we had sort of places we thought we wanted to go, and we would just knock on doors or leave things in mailboxes. And in our last year, we actually were able to get some of the compiled municipal property data that we could actually find addresses. So we did a mail out to landowners. And we thought, we hope we get like a 10% response rate, because it involved the person contacting us, right? So we would send a letter saying, we'd love to do a plant survey on your property. If you're interested, please email us. And we hope to get 10%, and 25%-ish of those mail outs actually contacted us. So we had way more places than we could possibly go to. So yeah, we aren't, and now that we're working on these translocations and actually tracking population size, we aren't doing these extensive summers of going around doing surveys anymore. So yeah, I'm not really collecting interested landowners, but I really advocate for, I wish the province had a program that would, allow landowners to register and say, if biologists are interested in woodlots in my area, they're welcome to come, kind of thing. Because that's how you build the relationship with the landowner, where the biologist is able to say, yeah, you've got this cool plant and this cool plant and this whatever butterfly and this, because that's how you get to know where these things are. And we can't conserve them if we don't know where they are. So yeah, the answer is, unfortunately, I don't have crews out doing surveys anymore. However, if you think you have one of these super rare plants, I'm always happy to get emails with photos saying, is this a wood poppy? Those kind of things.
I can imagine those are some exciting and fun emails to receive.
Yeah, as long as it's not a sort of blurry
Fair enough.
And then I say, oh, I have no idea what that is.
Fair enough. Well, there's so many great questions coming in here, Jenny. A really wonderful presentation. Before we wrap up the conference today and today's webinar, I just wanted to say, if you aren't a member of the Ontario Woodlot Association, but enjoyed this webinar or others that we've been hosting, we'd like to encourage you to consider becoming a member for a small annual fee. And now I'd like to pass things over to Planning Committee member Dorothy Hamilton, just to wrap things up for us.
Thanks, Olivia. Just want to say it is our final presentation for this year, and we've had 4 excellent presentations. If anybody has an idea, we're already starting to look at number 38 and see what we can put together for next year. We always keep hoping that maybe we will get back to having a live presentation where everybody can come to Kemptville for the actual conference, and we'll keep looking at that. But just starting at the top and working down, Olivia, thank you. Wonderful job of coordinating all the presentations for this year. And I think we've been quite successful in looking at the numbers of people who signed up and people who actually participated. Of course, Jenny and the other speakers for giving their time to do these presentations. That's very much appreciated. And thanking my co-partners, Martin Strait and Jim Hendry, for their ideas and participation. And of course, not least but not last, our sponsors. They've stayed with us through all these years, and it's always good to know that they're still willing to sponsor the conference, and we're very appreciative of that fact. And I guess lastly, the participants. Without you, the conference wouldn't happen. So thank you to everybody.
Well said. Thank you, Dorothy. So with that, I think we can wrap things up and bring it to a close. Thank you again, Jenny, and thank you, Dorothy, and the Planning Committee, and we'll sign off.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.